Well, first of all, welcome everyone to the session 3 of Anodos. Super excited to be here. It's good to see so many people here. Wanted to start just briefly with having you guys say something, if at all possible. And if you got nothing, that's cool too. But if anybody would like to volunteer any thoughts as to so far, have there been any substantial takeaways from Anodos? Has there been anything that you've implemented in your life, or ideas that you've had, conclusions you've drawn, or ideas you're tracking at the moment that are worth mentioning?
Well, I know personally that I've been trying, at least because of this, just trying to stay a little more conscious whenever I'm making decisions. Like, is this falling in a worldview that I'm just kind of stuck in because this is how everyone else has been doing stuff? Or is this like, am I intentionally like making this decision because it falls in the worldview of what I want Christ to lead me into? So it's at least made me, these 2 sessions so far has at least gotten me where I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional.
Intentionality, that's awesome. I mean, that's a huge thing, because what most people are going through every day, including myself, is just we're on autopilot, right? We wake up, we do the same thing we did yesterday, watch the same news we watched the day before, and look at the same screens or whatever else it is. And so the fact that it's jarred you a little bit out of that and making you proactively think about it, it's great. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for myself, I've had some thoughts in my mind for a long time that it's nice to hear somebody else put it into words. And it's like I couldn't come up with ways of explaining things before, but over the past week I've interacted with some younger people, and it was kind of nice just to have some words to borrow to help explain things. So
that's awesome. Thanks. Yeah.
And there's been a few people in addition to them that, like he said, is nice to have a understanding that the way we're viewing things is based on our past experiences and the lenses and our telescope things. So.
Yeah, that's great. There's nothing that's in Anodos that is like new information. Nothing that's novel. Nothing that's from Derek and Derek alone. Everything in here is ancient knowledge, ancient wisdom. And if you remember, and we'll make the claim tonight, and I think we've already made the claim in previous sessions, that much of this is written on the human heart. Right? So you should be able to hear something tonight that's presented and be like, have the exact reaction you did, which is, wow, you just put into words something I've felt my entire life. And so if there's a God, if that God created humanity, if that humanity has a purpose, then that means that the language of creation, the language of God, is built into you, and some of these realizations that you're having are echoing through your soul. And so that would make a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
I'll share. Coming out of a political season where you have a lot of discussions, or I've had a lot of debates, I think understanding a lot of these concepts, or having clarity why people believe what they believe, it's helped me have empathy for other people. Oftentimes it's like, if you can't understand why they believe what they believe, it's a lot harder to have a discussion, or so then you can go if it's an argument, or if they view something completely different than I do, and it's like, okay, well, maybe they're coming at it from a more worldly, materialistic, postmodernistic viewpoint, and then you get it. It's like, oh, I really do understand why you would think that, would believe that. So
that's a great point.
Clarity.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes so much sense. So yeah, philosophy, theology, religion should be a force that tempers our wildest political aspirations, or our political views, right? Should be something that sort of grinds off the sharp edges of a political view you might take, and bring people together towards this closer to the truth. And so you can begin to see, when we talk about worldviews, and understand that when somebody sees the world very differently than you, or come to drastically different conclusions, it's not because they're a bad person. It's because they have been infected with bad ideas or worse. So So yeah, it gives us sort of the context and language to be able to humanize people that we might otherwise demonize. Yep. Okay. Again, welcome to session 3 of Anodos. This session is on reclaiming the spiritual world. In the last session, we talked about the vertical world and how the vertical world was this key that helped us open this door, this big pivot point towards something much more grand. We talked about how the vertical world is inescapably human. We talked about how the vertical world is pragmatically true, and the vertical world is core to existence, and the alternative is absolutely horrifying. And this vertical world is really this world of transcendental categories, this world of these things that are beyond the physical realm, these things that we can't taste, touch, hear, smell, and yet we know are fundamentally true. Things like love, or that fundamentally exist, things like love and truth and beauty and goodness. And then we also talked about sacrifice. We talked about how it's human to sacrifice what we want for what we ought. The material things that, we don't need any motivation to desire and to pursue for the things that are transcendent and beyond those. So just briefly, sort of my own story here. In 2019, we were in a very good place with the business, having gone through all those troubles. I think last time I showed you the, selling things in our house so that we could make payroll and, putting money into the ATM. But in 2019, we had sort of overcome those big obstacles, and things were going really well. The team, we had around 120 employees, revenue that was 10 times higher than what it had ever been, winning awards and all these types of things. And everything was going so well, but the company sort of got to the point where the type of work that needed to be done wasn't really the type of work that I was good at, right? So when the company starts out, it's sort of all about coming up with great product ideas and inspiring people. And as the company gets bigger, the role of the chief executive is more like risk mitigation and capital allocation and process optimization and all these things. And there's better people for that. And so I decided to take a step back from running the company after more than a decade. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience. But after stepping back, and having gotten to this point where we were sort of out of this risk zone, we were out of the danger zone, you had this sense that you had climbed this mountain, that you'd been spending a decade climbing this mountain and been at moments of risk and demise, but you were finally at the top of this mountain, and all you could see at the top of this mountain was other mountains. And I think this goes for just about anything. If you're in sports, or you're working out, you're working on your fitness, whatever it is, as soon as you accomplish some big goal that you've been working on, the next goal arises, right? And so these mountains have meaning, and we can climb those mountains well or climb those mountains poorly, but not all mountains are created equal. And we talked last time briefly about how we will all go through suffering, we will all die, all these most difficult possible things will happen to us, and the only thing that can guide us through those moments is the divine, is the transcendent. And so I was left with this decision to say, well, what mountain am I going to climb next? Am I going to climb a mountain that looks just like the one that I just climbed? That would certainly be easy. I had all the equipment. I had, climbed mountains like that before. But is that the most meaningful mountain? I want to watch a real quick video clip here.
But for the secular people listening out there who might wince at the idea of the ineffable, that's fine. I understand it. The only thing we actually need to know about that is whatever it is you're chasing right now, it ain't it. Whatever it is you think is the most important, it's not. It's not the most important. The supreme good is not money, it's not energy, it's not freedom, it's not family, it's not knowledge, it's not safety, it's not diversity, and it's not inclusion. Though all those things are good, they should never be treated as the supreme good, lest they become idols and gods that will tyrannize us. And so the goods must dance together. They play against each other. They have to be put in proper hierarchies, where the more encompassing goods, like the virtues, guide the lower goods, like the stuff, with none of the goods completely ruling the others, or else they might become, once again, vices that will overwhelm you. And so, and at least for now, I think that even for those who are here or those who are watching this who do not believe and do not worship the supreme ineffable good, at least keep your eyes high, and at least always look higher, and don't let your sight and your perception stop at the goods that you care about today. So thank you.
That's Jonathan Peugeot, and we're going to be hearing from him a bit more in this presentation. But the point that Jonathan is making here is that there's many goods that are out there, right? And many goods that you could pursue. And that oftentimes we'll identify one good and we'll make it our mountain that we're climbing. But if it's a mountain that's above all other mountains, then, and it's not the thing that we should be most focused on, then it sort of creates these tyrannies because it's leaving something out. So for instance, if you're focused on freedom, and then you don't balance that with duty, then freedom becomes chaos, right? And so there's these mountains that you could climb that, although they are good if they're appropriately nested under the highest possible mountain, they become bad by you making them the most important thing. And so it's not good enough to just pursue something that's good. You have to, whatever it is that's good that you're pursuing, has to be appropriately nested under what's most good.
Derek, would you say this is what many of us experienced, or at least felt, during COVID? Safety became the highest good, and in that, it also became the very thing that terrorized people.
Have you seen this presentation?
I watched the whole thing.
Oh, good. I was like, dude, this is weird because he makes that exact.
Well,
That's right, yeah.
It's been a year since I've seen it, so I didn't remember that. But yeah.
Yeah. So what he makes the argument in here that during COVID, we fought for things that were really good, like safety. Well, let's protect people. Let's make sure that they're taken care of and all that. But when you make safety your God, the highest peak, then everything else gets squashed. Everything gets tilted and twisted and thrown out of balance. And we have to measure things, we have to balance things like safety with all the other goods that are around. And so this is a good way of describing any sort of political problem, right? You know something's wrong, but you don't know what. It's because they're over-prioritizing something. They may not be advocating for something that's bad in and of itself. You know, that diversity and equity and inclusion is a big one recently, right? Those are good terms. Those are valuable terms. They're addressing something that is real, but unless they're balanced appropriately, they become bad as a consequence. And so you don't want to throw those things out the window and just say, well, these are, no good, and you don't want to embrace them whole cloth. The balance is where the beauty lies. And so, I think one of the things that our society, when I saw this image and sort of began to understand its meaning, it kind of scared the heck out of me. Because it sort of really hit home. And I think for a lot of people who have pursued wealth or other things and ran the risk of overemphasizing it, it'll make sense. So I'm just going to read this poem briefly. This image, by the way, this is a wood carving by Jonathan Peugeot, the guy you just saw speaking. And then the poem was a co-creation of mine and OpenAI. I'll give OpenAI most of the credit. So, in the halls of gold, the king does rest. A life of triumph none contest. Upon his throne of might and pride, earth's treasures vast, yet empty inside. His crown adorned with victory's prize, but closed to heaven's sacred skies. His soul asleep, his spirit bound, in worldly gains no peace is found. Beneath the mountain's holy height, he's lost in darkness, shunned the light. For all he's won in life's brief race, he missed the path to God's embrace. The raven waits in shadows deep for one who chose the worldly heap. Awake, O king, before too late. Climb high, ascend through heaven's gate. And so...
Reminds me of Greed is Good. Do you remember
Yeah,
that show?
That's right. And so, this king has climbed a lot of mountains. He's got the treasures all around him that reflect these mountains that he's climbed. And yet he's asleep, which reflects spiritual sleep, meaning he's missing the most important stuff. He may be physically awake, but he's spiritually sleeping. And he's under the mountain. He's not under the wealth mountain. He's not under the victory mountain. He's not under the conquering other nations mountain, whatever mountains he's won. But he's buried beneath the most important mountain, which is the spiritual mountain, the holy mountain. So you can apply this to anything. This isn't just a thing about wealth. This is about prioritizing one good above the other goods to the detriment of everything else. And so for me, this has been a big transformational experience in my life over the last 3 years to understand these things and try to say, well, what is it that looks like success to me now? And those things have radically changed. And so this search for what's at the top of the mountain, this is an endless story. Humans through time have been pursuing the top of various mountains. And the reason, I think, is been put differently by many different people through history. Blaise Pascal probably is one of the more popular, famous versions of it. There's a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man, which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. Okay, so any mountain that you climb that's sort of earthly, whether it's your health and fitness, whether it's wealth, whether it's food, gluttony, that sort of thing, they will never fully satisfy humanity. Until you reach God, you'll be unsatisfied. This is a biblical concept in Ecclesiastes. He has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work of God does from beginning to end. What does it mean to have eternity in your hearts? Our hearts are associated with what it is that we're pursuing, what it is that we're desiring most. Similarly, in Romans, they who show the work of the law written on their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness between themselves, their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. Why is it that we have a conscience? Why is it that it points in a certain direction? All humanity's conscience points in the same direction. Plato famously talked about this in the allegory of the cave. For those of you who don't know what the allegory of the cave is, it depicts prisoners chained inside of this dark cave. They're only able to see shadows that are cast on a wall. They're cast by this fire. And one prisoner gets freed in the story, and upon emerging from the cave, experiences the blinding light of the sun, the beauty of the outside, and begins to realize that everything that he's known, everything that he's been exposed to up until this point was fake, was unimportant, was of no value. And being exposed to reality he decides he must share this with the other prisoners, and so he goes back down into the tunnel to share with his new knowledge with the other prisoners, and they end up rejecting him and ridiculing him, and they're quite comfortable where they're at, right? And so even if you have this knowledge, even if you know what the truth is, being able to convince other people of it is not always possible. St. Gregory of Nyssa, this is way back in the 4th century. The soul seeks God with insatiable desire and never has enough of him. In Orthodox Christian churches, there's a dome above the nave. This is the main part of the church, and this reflects the vault of heaven, the separation between the material world and the spiritual world, with Christ depicted at the highest point where the transition actually takes place. The dome reflects the intersection of heaven and earth, where the faithful look up to transcend the earthly concerns and connect with the divine. A similar quote here from St. Maximus the Confessor: "The mind is called to go out of itself and be drawn toward God, who infinitely transcends all that is. It is only in God that the mind finds rest." And so you're seeing the same pattern over and over and over again from all these different sources. Another popular version of this is the Flammarion engraving, which sort of shows that there's this boundary between what we know, the known, and the unknown, and humanity's desire to look beyond that barrier, beyond the veil. Our ancient ancestors, they applied many of these things that they didn't understand. They knew that truth and beauty and goodness and love existed, but they didn't know where they were. They'd never seen one. And so they actually, attributed these to the stars. And we know that, the stars aren't these things. We know that they're balls of gas through science, but that doesn't really resolve the issue. We may have talked about this earlier, but science assumes the spiritual world in order to explain the material world. In order to ask a question, a scientist must assume that the answer matters. What do you mean matters? Must assume that the world is comprehensible. Must assume that there's more. There are things that are more good or more valuable, more experiments that would be better or worse to run. In order to draw conclusions, they must use reason and assume there's objective truth, objective reality. All of these things are not scientific claims, they're spiritual religious claims. Even logic and math and reason must be assumed. You can't prove reason with reason. You can't prove math with math. And so these are all they use what's called brute facts to say, well, it just is. Okay. Well, that's because if you think about, I remember when I went to college at Luther, there was battles between the chemistry and biology people to say who was like ground truth. The chemistry people were like, well, all the physics happens because the chemicals work, and the physics people say, oh, the chemicals move in that way because of physics, and you can't use physics to answer chemistry problems. You can't use chemistry. You can't solve chemistry problems with physics, and so because physics is not of the nature to answer chemistry questions. In the same way, science is not of the nature to answer these spiritual questions. Our ancestors, again, associated these things they knew to exist with the stars because they didn't know what the stars were. They could see them. So then when nominalism, materialism, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution came up, we started to say, okay, well, let's go investigate these things and see what we find. And we looked up into the heavens, and we looked down into with our telescopes, and we looked down with our microscopes, and we just kept finding more Earth. There's more Earth up, there's more Earth down, and so, well, that must be all there is. There just is Earth. And this is really the biggest category error of all category errors. Science is not of the nature to answer these questions. Nominalism, materialism are insufficient to explain reality. And this meme, I think, does the best job of anything I've seen that sort of gets this idea across, which is, this is a modern redo here of the Flammarion engraving. And you'll see on the right the ancient world, the world of enchantment, the world of mysticism, and then you see on the left that we've escaped this world. Thank goodness. Now we're in the world of hedonism and materialism and nominalism, and there is no purpose and there is no meaning. All there is stuff. And we're looking back as modern man saying, help. We've reached the end of this experiment. We've reached the end of nominalism, materialism. And what we found out is that we can't explain reality in the way that we thought we could. We cut things into smaller and smaller pieces and investigated them with microscopes at smaller and greater detail, and we still didn't find an answer. And we looked out into the stars, and we looked further and further away with the Hubble telescope, and we still can't find any answers. And so here we are, more technologically advanced, but far less wise than we ever have been. And so this is why I conclude that we must reclaim the spiritual world. So what is the spiritual world? Let's begin at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, the way I used to understand this, I don't know if you guys are with me on this, but earth to me meant the planet Earth, and heavens meant some other far-off physical place in the clouds, perhaps, where a man with a beard resided. And the actual ancient understanding is much more beautiful, I think, which is that the heavens are the spiritual world. This is the so you have two parts of the world here. You have the earth, which is associated at this point with water, and water is chaos, effectively. It's potential. It's what could be. And then the heavens are associated with the Spirit. The Spirit is hovering over the face of the waters. There's a word here, tohu vabohu. Did I pronounce that right? Tohu vabohu means the ancient Hebrews understood nothingness to essentially be chaos. When something came into order, that's when its existence began. And so you have tohu vabohu means everything was without form and void, means it was chaos. It was all waters. And then God pulled the earth out of the waters, and that's order coming to chaos. And so we have two parts of reality here. We have heaven, which is spirit and order, and we have earth, which is material and chaos. The word chaos you can also associate with potential. We find other pieces of evidence of what this realm is in the Nicene Creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. Right? Two-part reality. The parts you can see and the parts you can't. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6. So there's a part of reality where neither moth nor rust can destroy, and part where moth and rust can destroy. So again, we have a material reality and we have a spiritual reality. In Colossians, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things of earth. What are the things that Scripture tells us to seek? What are the things it tells us to avoid? The pattern, infinite number of verses here, where these are the transcendental categories. Okay, wisdom, truth, love, beauty, goodness. This is why we have the stars in the sky reference. So we have a world of matter and a world of what matters. Next, in Proverbs, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths were broken and the clouds dropped down the dew. Now this is a little bit hard to understand because some of these terms, when we're interpreting, translating from other languages, there isn't always a good equivalent. And so the word understanding here, I think, falls very short of what the actual meaning is. Understanding is basically like all knowledge, all wisdom, everything you could know, everything that could possibly be known. And so heaven is sort of the source of all understanding, the source of all knowledge, source of all wisdom. And then wisdom is the proper ordering of those things. So earlier we were talking about the mountain of goods that you could pursue this mountain of good and you could pursue that mountain of good. Wisdom is the proper ordering, the proper nesting of those goods, right? So I have freedom and I balance it with duty, and together they reach higher. Together they're both nested under the mountain of God. That's wisdom. And so this order, chaos, and potential thing is, again, if you go back to the first verses in Genesis there, God was pulling the earth, pulling order out of chaos, right? And this is pointing to the fact that we're kind of called to do the same thing. The next pattern that I want to point out is seed and soil. In Matthew 13, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And a mustard seed, if you don't know, is like a very, very tiny seed. So they're trying to say it's the smallest possible thing, almost invisible. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Okay, so we have a seed from heaven that's coming into the earth, the soil, and then the soil is turning that into a tree, right? It requires both. It requires the seed and it requires the soil. I think some of these other words here are kind of interesting too. The birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Maybe I'll remember to circle back to that. But a very similar pattern to seed and soil is the masculine and feminine. Now, don't get all excited, group of men. This doesn't mean heaven is good and men are good and women are, earth and bad. What this means is that this really points to the fact that heaven and earth are designed to be together. Right? One is not complete without the other. And so, again, you get this seed-soil pattern, the masculine-feminine pattern. The angel answered and said unto her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the highest will overshadow you. Therefore, also, the Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. Okay, so this is a seed from heaven becoming embodied through humanity. Right? Mary, everything that is human of Christ is from Mary, right? But the Spirit comes from above. The last pattern here is unity and multiplicity. So I dropped the holy mountain in the background here because another thing about mountains is that the further you go up, the less space there is, the less size there is, right? And so in order to climb to the top of a mountain, one of the things you realize is that you have to simultaneously decide not to climb a whole bunch of other mountains, right? This is what's called opportunity cost in business, right? If you decide to do X, you're simultaneously deciding not to do Y, Z, and A, B, C, right? So the further you move up a mountain, the less you can do other things, the less variability there is, the less multiplicity there is. As we move up towards God, there's less room for opinions and things like that. And so on earth, there's a great multiplicity. There's an infinite amount of detail, an infinite number of variables, an infinite number of particulars. But as you move up towards heaven, it's a singularity, it's a unity, it's a movement towards oneness. In Corinthians 4:8, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, and the things which are not seen are eternal. Obviously, very similar to the visible, invisible, seen, unseen. And again, it's tying in the pattern of one of these things is forever and always, and the other one is dying away, rust and moth. Okay. I'm going to stop there because that's a lot of symbolic talk. Any questions or desire to go back and look at one of these patterns in particular? Any of these confusing or less confusing than the others? Which one seems obvious to you? Like, of course.
Masculine and feminine to me.
Okay.
It's the most confusing to me.
That's the most confusing.
It makes no sense on
The only thing that kind of makes sense about it is like Jesus and like God are at least man. So like married man is earth, so feminine.
Okay, I can
So
see
that
that
would
now.
be the earthly side.
Okay.
Then God is spiritual. Like he came down, he
Your
overshadowed
father
us.
is the masculine, Mother Mary were
So that's
Mary
that,
Virgin was the feminine. Okay.
yeah. It's still confusing to me, but that's at least I understand it. Why is that the most?
Well, so I mean, I grew up in a secular age where a lot of my friends are atheists, even to this very day. So they dismiss the spiritual. But I'm a pastor, and one of the heresies that is active in the church today is what I would call Gnosticism, which dismisses the earth. So Gnosticism would say anything that's not spiritual is evil. So sex is bad, money is bad, anything that is not, quote, spiritual is bad. And they're basically the same thing, just different side of the coin. Atheism and Gnosticism are the exact same, just opposites. And neither one have ever not just felt true, but neither one have actually ever lifted anybody to a place of, this is it, like neither one of them have the ability to take you to anything real. And the only time I've ever been able to find real is when both of these are together. And so, like creation story, God creates man from the dust of the ground, then he breathes his spirit into the nostrils, and then it's the only creation he says, this is very good. So when spirit and when heaven and material are combined, it's very good. When it's just material, it's just good. When it's just spiritual, it's just good. When they're together, he claims very good. And so I see it everywhere.
Thank you.
And I would say that this masculine feminine one gets at a lot of sort of hot topics in the culture and stuff like that at this point. But I think what you see in Scripture is that these patterns, masculine and feminine, they're not arbitrary. They matter, and they reflect not just something socially, they reflect cosmic patterns of the way reality works.
And that would also be why, like in the Bible, it says, like, wives submit to your husbands. The husband is supposed to be over the wife. It's kind of just the way that, like, hierarchy that, like, God has made. So even in, like, this, it's very, like, Is that kind of where the masculine?
Well, it's tied to that. Yes, and the way the devil's in the details, right? The way that that's implemented really, really matters, and that's what really, really gets people upset. And so, what I would say is that's right, if all the terms are right and all the definitions are right and all the processes are right and all that. And so, this is why it's highly complicated, and it's not something that we can afford to get into in this presentation. But this pattern does exist. It is important. It's not arbitrary, and it can't be dismissed. And any effort to simply gray it out or, say I don't like that one, we should be really wary of that type of thing.
Would you be able to touch on how when that gets out of balance, like say in religion or spirituality, like what are some of the consequences? Are you going to maybe go into that, like the feminine versus the masculine? Just briefly, it's like an example of how that might, when that gets out of balance, or would be kind of mistake just the feminine for being, what's good.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like religion or church or just our daily
Right.
life.
So I don't want to get into it very much, but I will say, masculine is associated with order. In Genesis, Adam is naming the animals, bringing order to reality. The feminine is more associated with nurturing. It's not arbitrary that Eve is the one that had an open ear to the snake, right? So there's you can see this pattern in mythology. You can see it, in the queen whispering into the king's ear. There has to be a king. There has to be a queen. They have different roles, but neither one of them can be successful if they're not together. And same way in a family, right? And there are individual circumstances where there are families that the female in the family is more masculine and the man is more feminine. That exists. That absolutely exists. And that's not wrong. That's not bad. That's just abnormal. That's just atypical, right? But generally the man is providing the order in the family, and the feminine is providing the nurturing in the family, and the man is providing the resources, and the female is embodying, taking those resources and turning them into something that matters. And so those are some of the types of things I would say. What I would say is it's beautiful, and it's core reality. It's at the foundations of cosmic understanding. This is the way the cosmos is built. And so we ignore those things that are peril, but because they can be difficult to discuss, and people generally lack nuance and want to just, hit everything with a 10-pound hammer, it can be very difficult to discuss. And so I would be more than willing to discuss with any of you at length these patterns, but we just can't do it here. Is that okay? All right.
That was fun, though.
Yeah, you can see where it could go. Okay, so this creates a sort of a two-part reality of the unseen realm and the seen realm, the world of what matters and the world of matter. And this also gives us two different types of truth. So we have scientific truth, which is breaking the world down into its constituent parts to understand how it happened, what actually happened. And then there is spiritual truth, which is bringing the world together through universal patterns of meaning. So if you are taking a scientific analysis of the book of Genesis, it really is going to matter to you what mountain they landed on and what year this happened and how big the boat was and what kind of beams did they use and were there really two of every animal, and these would be the important things to you. But if you're focused on spiritual truth, then those details become almost meaningless, because what matters in the story of Genesis, in the story of Noah, for instance, is that it's this story of divine judgment paired with mercy. It's spiritual purification. It's God's protection and His judgment, redemption, renewal. what happens when you abandon God and leave God and say, I don't need God, I'm too prideful, I don't need anything but myself, versus if I rely on God for my salvation, right? So the story of Noah picks up on all these meaningful patterns, and it delivers it in a specific way. But if that specific way didn't exist, all the meaning would still be there, right? So this isn't a claim as to, I'm not saying that Noah happened or didn't happen. In fact, I think it did happen. But what I'm saying is, even if it didn't,
It's still true.
all the meaning is there. It's still true. It's hyper true. It's distilled truth. So this story of Noah, of what happens when you put your faith in God and your trust in God and you're saved, versus you abandon God and say, I don't need God, I'm too prideful, I don't need that. That story has happened an infinite number of times through history and will continue to happen into the future. The flood is here now. The flood is here today, and it'll be here tomorrow. Okay. Let's keep identifying some patterns here. What is heaven? What is earth? And what's our role in all of this? Okay, so we've just established a new reality. We've just established an entirely new realm. What's our role in all this? Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. I'm guessing you've all heard that or said that a few times. But now that we have this new cosmology, now that we have this new two-part world, the world of the spiritual and the world of the material, do any of these words strike you differently than they have in the past?
God gives us the message, but we got to make the mill and grind it.
That's right. Amen. Very well put. So we're sitting here in this lower world of potential. We have all the resources. We have all the abilities to create and do and be all sorts of wonderful things. And the spiritual world is up there and has given us all the information we need to make that happen. But we are the agents. We are the beings, the only beings that stand between these two worlds with the ability to perceive the spiritual and embody the material. Even the way our body is built. We got heads on the top and hands and feet on the bottom, right? So we have a conscience. We have a nous is a new term. Nous is an ancient term that this is the ability for you to perceive the spiritual world clearly. You know what beauty is. You know what goodness is. I don't need to define it for you. And that's because you have a nous. And so this is the pattern that Scripture lays out as to how these two worlds interact, how they complete each other. The spiritual world of heaven, the heavens, inform the earth, provide information. And the material world is to embody or make manifest the spiritual world. Put differently, just putting some different words in there, we receive revelation. We receive from Scripture, for instance, here's how things are. Here's what's good. Here's what's bad. Here's what's right. Here's what's wrong. Here's what's beautiful. And we're supposed to make that happen, but making it happen doesn't just happen. Making it happen means making sacrifices, setting aside what we want for what we ought. Going back to the previous presentation, again, you have the material world sort of inward looking, and you have the vertical world outward and upward looking.
And you see it, most people today even, they tend to oppose normally the spiritual and the material, they oppose it. And so either they fall into one or the other, either they want to poo-poo the material practice and the material world, like people who say I'm spiritual but not religious, that kind of nonsense. And then on the other hand, we have people who think that this material world is so real, like that's what we need to chase after. But both of those are a mistake. The physical materiality is the bottom part and the most immediate, but ultimately it has to move us into
what lies behind it. Yeah. And again, what lies behind it is there, even if you want to try to deny it. Like people who live very promiscuously, that does things to your heart and to your soul over time. You can't be intimate with people physically and not also develop intimate connections in other ways.
Yeah, like leave some part of your soul like with that person.
So, he's just basically repeating what I had said there, which is the purpose of the material is to embody that spiritual. We have to, the spiritual or the material is what's easy to grasp. It's immediate. It's here. It's now. We all understand it, and yet it's the least valuable. But it becomes valuable when it embodies what actually matters. Pastor Steve, this reflects what you were saying either with Gnosticism instead of idealism here. But there is materialism, which is sort of people who just think that there is a material world. There is idealism or Gnosticism, which is the only thing that matters is this spiritual world. And what's beautiful, particularly beautiful about Christianity when in this comparison, is that Christianity doesn't throw out either one of these. This, if you're asking, I had somebody ask me the other day, like, why Christianity and not Hinduism or whatever, right? Well, this is one of the reasons. Because a lot of those, especially Eastern religions, are really focused on idealism, right? That this world, just want nirvana, right? Yeah, we need spiritual perfection. We need to escape this ugly, disgusting material world. Christianity says that it is good. It was created good. It has the potential to be good, and through your cooperation with God, it becomes good, right? And so there's this incarnation. Incarnation is when the spiritual world moves into the material world, becomes material. You can also use the word embodiment. So we're embodying the spiritual world, or sacramentalism. Sacrament is when the spiritual world moves to the material world, becomes physical. Or symbolic realism. All four of those terms are accurate here. If you'd like to learn more about that topic, I would recommend two brothers. Again, all this stuff is ancient understandings. None of this is new, but they're sort of putting it in new modern terms, and so I would recommend it. Jonathan Pajot, I've been to his a conference of his, met him in person, and Mathieu, I guess is how you pronounce that. It's French Canadian. It's his brother, and so if you're more of an artist, you got an artist path here and a math path. If you're more of an artist, you'll probably be more drawn to Jonathan and the way he talks and the way he presents things. If you're more of a mathematician, then pick up Language of Creation by Mathieu Pajot. This book has tons of cool diagrams, just like the ones that I was just showing you, where he picks apart Scripture and shows you the patterns inside of it. Okay. So at this time, I would like, if you're willing, to all light a candle together. This will just be a quick demonstration. Jeff, there's lighters there. If you could. Okay. So we've introduced a new cosmology, introduced a new idea about how the world can be constructed, not just material, but material and spiritual, two realms, heaven and earth. But we haven't answered yet where the Transcendentals go. Right? So truth and beauty and goodness and love, what are these things? And so I want to do that now. In the sort of the modern Western understanding, God is infinitely simple. That's how it gets described. And so there is just God, this essence that we can't know, and then there is the creation, everything that comes from God. And in the ancient understanding, there was actually two parts to God. There was the essence, which is unknowable, the part that we can't touch or see or we would burn, right? There's all sorts of verses in Scripture where we can't look upon God's face directly, right? And so this candle is a good analogy here to say, there's part of this flame that I can't touch without getting burned. I can't possibly know it without destroying myself, whatever it is that tries to know it, right? But there is a way that I can know the flame without actually touching the flame. And that's to put my hand around it. And you can go ahead and do that. And now you can feel the flame. You can feel it warming you, changing you. And so the ancient way of looking at God was that there's two parts. There's the unknowable essence, the part that I can't dare get close to. And then there's the participative energies, the energies of God, which I can interact with, right? And here's a quote from St. Basil the Great. We know God from his energies. So this is way back in the 4th century here, 300s. We know God from his energies, but we do not claim that we can draw near to his essence. For his energies descend to us, but his essence remains inaccessible. And so these energies are the transcendentals that we've been talking about for 3 weeks now. Love, truth, beauty, wisdom, goodness. There's a list of about 30 or 40 more. And obviously, theoretically, these would be infinite. But the beautiful part of these energies is that, unlike my previous perception of God, is that this, the bearded man in the clouds is far off, far away from me, in the distance, not close. Now you have this sense that God is immanent. God is right here. So if God is love, if God is truth, if God is beauty, wisdom, goodness, then the extent to which I have love in my heart, the extent to which I live with love in my life or show love to someone else, that's God dwelling in me. All right, so not only does God know who you are or check in occasionally, but he's here now, immanent, indwelling you. 1 John 4:12, no one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God resides in us, and his love is perfected in us. What does it mean to have God reside in you? And there are diversities of activities, energeia, but it is also the same God who works all in all. So there's energies, diversities of energies, but one God who works all in all. So the essence is singular, the energies are many. And then Galatians, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. All right, so if you set aside your own desires, set aside your own wants, my own material desires, and replace those with the transcendental categories that we've been talking about, with the energies of God, then that's God dwelling within you. That's God acting within you. That's communion. That's like the point. So why do the energies matter? This is how we know God. This is how God is near to us. This is how God loves and sustains us. This is how we participate in God. Right? So it's not just you do some things and God does some things and he judges you for some of those things that you do. There's actual cooperation happening. Right? You're walking hand in hand. And then this is how we're transformed by God, right? So if you gain in love in your heart, gain in goodness, all these things, you are changed by God. You are crucifying your will so that God might dwell in your heart. And then this is union. This is communion. So who are we? Where do we fit in? What are we doing here? What are we called to do? This is not actually the purpose of this session. We're sort of jumping into the next session here, but just as a little bit of a teaser here. If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things of this earth. So this connects to the mountain, right? If we're climbing the ultimate mountain, if we're climbing the mountain of mountains, the mountain for which all other mountains should be nested under, then we are seeking those things which are above, setting our mind on the things above and not of earth. Now this next part was kind of questionable as to whether I was going to include it because it's a little complicated. It's a little abstract. And as I was talking through it with my wife, we realized that it was 1 year from today when this happened, and so I felt obligated to tell you. So this is a little bit of a complicated topic here, but I think it's worth it. Okay, so is there anyone in here who would spit on their loved one's grave? Why not? Why wouldn't you do that? What's that?
Clean the mud off.
Okay. Okay, you're giving me a good reason why you should, but why would you not do it?
Although they are not alive to appreciate the honor that it might bring, you're still honoring the memories that you had with that person.
Honor, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love.
So,
Love.
Respect.
Respect. Yep. But it's just granite, right?
they don't care, but you do.
I think they care.
I wouldn't go with that.
I don't think they're dead. I mean, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Jesus said God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. I just don't see him as dead. So it'd be like, for me, spitting on the grave would be equivalent to spitting on the face.
Spitting out someone's house.
Put differently, why do you salute a polyester flag of the United States? It's just polyester. Why salute it?
It represents the greater that's behind it. So it's an icon of a reality.
And for the same reason, we probably remove our hat when we enter a church or a funeral parlor, right? Well, I think this is it's a good thing because as supposed materialists that we all are, modernists, materialists, the spiritual world and this incarnation, the way the spiritual world actually influences the material world, is not lost on us, right? Almost nobody would spit on the grave of their loved ones because we have this sense that even though it is just an inanimate object, even though it is just granite, that it has some connection to the spiritual world. It has some connection to something beyond granite. It has some connection to something beyond polyester. C.S. Lewis said, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun is risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." Right? This is why, tonight's presentation, I'm sharing with you all sorts of things that I can't prove to you that beauty exists. I can't prove to you that truth exists or love exists. You have to take it on faith because it is not of the nature to be proven, right? And so how do we recognize the truth? How do we recognize a reality that exists but can't possibly be put in a beaker and studied? Because when we understand it, everything becomes more clear. Because when we see that there's a spiritual material world, all of a sudden, things that were confusing before start to fall into place. And so does this vision that we've cast help you understand reality in a way that you may have not seen it before? Okay, so this is the part that happened a year ago. So when we work to embody the spiritual world, right, we learn something, say through scripture, or we learn it at church, or wherever we learn it, and we work to embody it here on earth, we are living and creating and being in a way that reflects the heavens, right? There's something about what we're doing that tells us about what's above. We're bringing heaven to earth. We're taking heaven, we're taking earth, and we're embodying it. We're turning it into something. And so there is this real connection between physical objects and the spiritual reality that they reflect. And so we're actually participating and communing with the divine through this process, right? When you kiss your daughter's forehead to sleep, you're participating in a heavenly activity. When you're repairing somebody's furnace for free, you're participating in a heavenly reality. You're injecting good into a chaotic world filled with potential. You're making that chaos into something greater. And so, anyway, Jessica and I went to this a year ago today, probably about this time. We went to an Orthodox Christian monastery in Kenosha, which is near Chicago. And in this monastery, it's beautiful, ornate. The amount of detail is just unbelievable, and every detail has a meaning. You say, what is that? There's a story, there's a meaning. What is that? There's a story, there's a meaning. And we went to a 5-hour-long liturgy there. And I kept my attention the whole time, believe it or not, and it wasn't even in English, it was in Greek. But anyway, beautiful music, beautiful chanting, all these types of things, the artwork beautiful, the dome beautiful, the architecture beautiful, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that really stood out to me was the chandelier. So they had the chandelier that was probably 50 feet in diameter, 50 feet across, and looks like gold. I'm sure it's not gold, but it looks like gold. It had to weigh 10,000 pounds, just massive. And there's all these layers, all these levels. There's 100 candles that are lit on this, and throughout the service, they're lighting these candles and extinguishing these candles at different parts. And at one point, after they had ignited all the candles, and the people that are in this monastery are nuns, monks, people who've dedicated their lives to Christ. They've given away all earthly pleasures and just effectively pray. That's what they do. They live a life of prayer. And the nuns would grab the chandelier with this long pole and swing it. And so all of a sudden, this huge 10,000-pound chandelier is swinging around the room, left, right. And there's layers, and the top layer is swinging in a different direction, the bottom layer. And it was beautiful, but I didn't know what it meant. So when it was appropriate, I asked the guy next to me, what's going on? What is this? And he said, well, you know how the church is like the ark, right? I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. This is where we're safe. This is God's protection, right? So inside the church, this is like the ark. And then outside is chaos. Outside the church, outside of the community of God, is chaotic, troubled waters, sin and everything that goes with it. And so this chandelier is reflecting the fact that we're on this ark, swaying in the waters, the chaotic waters of reality, right? Now, that's a beautiful symbol, but I think everybody's first thought is, well, it's theater, right? Like they're just putting on theater. It's a show. But when you start to understand that the material world is meant to reflect the spiritual world, and that we are the agents that are meant to make it reflect, you start to realize that efforts that we make in the material world to bring down heavenly principles and embody them, that this isn't just theater, right? It's not theater when you kiss your daughter goodnight. That's not theater. That's participation. You're participating in these spiritual realities. And so you could look at this as just a symbol. It's and symbol in the modern minimization, minimal. There's two types of symbol. Symbol in the modern way, which just means a fake thing pointing to a real thing, or you could look at it as a symbol in the way the ancients understood it, which is that a symbol is something that is distilled truth. It's all these particulars in the material world pointing to this one symbol, which represents this spiritual reality and this material reality. So it's everything coming together. So this chandelier isn't just a bit of theater. It's an attempt of humanity to better reflect the spiritual reality, right? And so I came to all of a sudden associate, going into a room like this with seeing the world as it actually is, right? If God exists, if the angels exist, if spirits exist, if there is this intercourse, this interrelation between the spiritual material world, and we're actively trying to embody it at every step, then this chandelier and this church and all this isn't just theater, it's helping us see reality as it actually is. So that's kind of abstract and difficult to understand. I would be glad to talk with any of you afterwards, but in any case, it's beautiful. And even if you take the simplest possible version of it, even if it is just a simple in the modern way, maybe we're at least accomplishing some beauty here.
I mean, this kind of goes back to the telescope. If you're talking about this as a lens that allows you to see, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what you basically said. Like there was a materialistic lens that you wore for a long time, and then it was, let's say, it fell off, and you're searching for something new, a new lens, because there's a reality, you just can't quite make it out.
Right.
And this was a pivotal point for you, to where it was almost like God was like here and plopped it on your eye. And you're like, whoa.
Right.
Now I see.
Yes. Yeah, and for me, it's been transformational. Like movies that I used to watch and see it one way, now I watch and I see it in a totally different way.
Yeah.
This movie, Stranger Than Fiction, I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's a Will Ferrell movie, but it's a drama, which is just kind of a jarring experience. But it's a drama. Will Ferrell's in it, and he does really good, actually, quite good. And but at the end of the movie, I won't tell you what happens, but he basically has to sacrifice himself. And old me would have looked at that and said, well, that was kind of foolish. He just lost out on all these things, because he did this nice thing for someone else. And now it's just whoa. He just stepped all the way into heaven on that one. He just pulled heaven all the way down to earth and just did exactly what he was supposed to do, right? So anyway, here's just a short clip of what that looked like. Kind of had to be there. Okay, so again, the mountain that we're climbing, what we need to do, we're all climbing different mountains. And it's, we're talking about all these grandiose ideas. We're talking about, transcendental properties. We're talking about the essence of God. We're talking about all these things. But basically, at the end of the day, the first thing you want to do is make sure that any mountain you're climbing is properly nested under the mountain, right? There is nothing wrong with pursuing health and fitness. There's nothing wrong with pursuing wealth. There's nothing wrong with pursuing any of these things, but you can make it wrong by making it God. If you make your material pursuits the highest thing, then it's going to cause pain. It's going to end up in a bad place. And so there's a right way and a wrong way, and the right way involves perfect aligning the mountain you're climbing with the short-term mountain you're climbing with sort of the long-term big picture mountain that you're climbing. In other words, where God has placed you, there can be a saint. A saint, by the way, is somebody who eventually gets to heaven. A saint is somebody who dwells with the Lord. If you are a teacher, be a holy teacher. If you are a craftsman, be a holy craftsman. If you are a monk, be a holy monk, right? So there are ways that you can bring holiness into whatever it is that you do. You can be a dad, you can be a holy dad. You can be a carpenter, you can be a holy carpenter. A holy carpenter doesn't screw people on their bills, right? And it can be manifested in all sorts of ways, obviously. Finally, what's something that you do every week? What's something that you have to do every week? I'm obligated. This is, I take out the trash, or I put the kids down, or whatever else it is, right? I go to work. And from now on, whenever I do that blank, I'm going to make sure and do blank. And basically what I want you to do is to try and pull in some of these energies of God and say, if I did that thing that I always have to do, but I added in this energy of God, if I lived a little bit more in that direction, this is what I would do, right? This is, again, we've been talking about all these grandiose things, but we have to start somewhere. And even the little things we do in our life really, really matter. And so what's one humble way that you could bring more love into your life, more goodness into your life, more honor into your life? Just one good idea. Okay. And for anybody who's keeping track, we kind of demolished two of the big ideas here. So when we got rid of relativism, when we said, hey, it's not just your opinion, my opinion, all the subjectivity anymore. When we got rid of that, when we got rid of relativism and replaced it with universalism, we kind of got rid of materialism too, because you can't have something that's, if something is good and something is better and something is best, you're establishing a reality of something that is immaterial. Likewise with nominalism, we have established here that these aren't just ideas in our head, they're not just fake categories, they're actually real things that actually exist and we can participate in them. And so the pyramid is starting to look quite a bit different. Thank you all. Appreciate it.